The city slept in silence, but inside the grand mansion atop Hillview Estate, a faint light flickered from the kitchen. It wasn't the security staff or the night guards. No. It was Maria, the maid. Bent over the old, worn-out pages of a second-hand book, her tired eyes raced against the clock, knowing dawn would soon demand her back to scrubbing floors and polishing glass. What she didn't know was that someone had noticed. From the shadowed staircase, Ethan Cole, the billionaire tech mogul, owner of the house, stood still, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold before him. He had returned from his business trip earlier than expected, quietly letting himself into the house, only to find his maid awake at nearly 2 a.m., surrounded by textbooks, a single lamp fighting the darkness, and a mug of cheap instant coffee. At first, curiosity glued him to the spot. Then something deeper, something unfamiliar for a man whose world revolved around money, mergers, and meetings. He stood there longer than he meant to, watching Maria flip through pages with determination that seemed out of place for someone who spent her days in a uniform cleaning up after strangers. The next morning, Ethan couldn't shake the image from his mind. Maria, 24, had been working for him for over a year, quiet, polite, hardworking. She had always blended into the background, the way the world taught people like her to do. But now, she had his attention. A few days passed. He observed her. Always the same pattern, long hours of physical labor during the day, and once the house was asleep, she'd disappear into the kitchen with her books. Curiosity finally overpowered his usual distance. One night, Ethan approached her. Maria jumped when she saw him. Embarrassed, she tried to close the book, but it was too late. Ethan sat down across from her at the kitchen table. For a man used to commanding boardrooms and making billion-dollar deals, his voice came out unusually soft. "Why are you studying at this hour, Maria?" There was silence. Her hands trembled slightly, fingers playing with the frayed corner of the book, before she whispered, "Because it's the only time I have." Her answer was so simple, yet it weighed heavily in the air. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Studying for what?" Maria hesitated. Finally, she exhaled and lifted the book. "I want to become a doctor." A maid. A doctor. The contrast hit him like a cold wave. She continued, her voice cracking under the weight of her own confession. "My mother died when I was 16. We couldn't afford treatment. I had to leave school to work, to take care of my younger brother. I promised myself that one day, I'd save lives, so no child would have to sit helpless, watching their mother die like I did." It wasn't self-pity. It wasn't an excuse. It was the pure, raw truth of someone fighting against odds no one else could see. Ethan didn't speak that night, but something inside him shifted. He had spent years building a fortune, surrounding himself with the world's brightest minds, but here was his maid, more determined than any CEO he'd ever met, and all she had were second-hand books, borrowed notes, and a fragile dream. In the days that followed, he quietly asked around about her. Everything checked out. She worked 2 part-time jobs before this one, had a spotless reputation, and even sent part of her salary home to her brother, who was still in school. She wasn't just studying for herself, she was carrying the weight of an entire future. One evening, Ethan invited her to his study. Maria stood awkwardly by the door, her hands wringing the hem of her uniform. "I did some thinking," Ethan began, walking over to his desk and pulling out a crisp envelope. "Consider this an early bonus." She hesitated before opening it. Inside wasn't money. It was an acceptance letter, to one of the most prestigious medical foundation programs in the state, fully funded. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ethan smiled, something rare for him. "You don't belong in this house, Maria. You belong in a hospital, saving lives. I made some calls. The program starts next semester. Housing, tuition, even your books, all covered. Your only job now is to study." Tears filled her eyes. For a moment, her body seemed to forget how to stand, and she sank into the chair, covering her face. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the breaking of years of silent suffering. But Ethan wasn't finished. He offered her something more than just charity, he offered her dignity. She would repay the scholarship once she became a doctor, no strings attached, no pressure. All he asked was that, one day, she help someone else in the same way. The day Maria packed her things, the staff gathered to wish her luck. It was the first time Ethan noticed how many lives she had quietly touched, from leaving extra food for the night guards to knitting scarves for the gardener's twin daughters in winter. Years passed. Ethan almost forgot what it felt like to wait for someone's success, but he followed Maria's progress quietly through the foundation. She worked harder than anyone. No skipped classes, no late submissions, no complaints. And then the day came, she graduated, top of her class. But the story didn't end there. One evening, years later, Ethan found himself in the emergency room after collapsing from chest pain. Through the blur of hospital lights and frantic nurses, he caught a familiar voice. "Mr. Cole, you're going to be okay. I promise." Maria stood over him, now in a white coat, stethoscope around her neck, her eyes as determined as they were that night at the kitchen table. She kept her promise. To herself. To her mother's memory. And now, to him. As he recovered, Ethan realized that helping Maria had done something money alone never could. It gave him peace. It reminded him that wealth, when used right, could rewrite a person's story. When he finally left the hospital, Maria sent him a handwritten note. "You believed in me when the world saw a maid. Thank you for changing my life. I'll spend the rest of it changing others." And Ethan knew, his greatest investment was not a company, or a mansion, or a tech empire. It was her.